The sun is just beginning to come up when Brother Andrew steps into the refectory. He can smell the fresh wheat bread that's been baked for breakfast. The monks are not allowed to eat butter on their bread, unless it's Christmas or another special day. And the rules of the monastery say that no one can eat the meat of a four-legged animal. So sausage, bacon, and beef are never on the breakfast table. But he likes the thick, crusty brown bread. And this morning, there are cooked beans and peas and a few sweet, withered apples, the last of the fall harvest, kept in a cool dirt cellar until now. Monks are not allowed to talk at meals. Instead, Brother John reads to them from the Bible while they eat in silence. But Brother Andrew whispers to the monk next to him, "How did your pupils behave yesterday?" Terribly, the monk whispers back. He teaches in the monastery school, where village children are sent to be educated. They do not want to learn how to write. Every time I turn my back, they whisper and giggle to each other. They do not pay any attention to me at all. And they drew a rude picture of me on the slate when I had to go out for a few minutes. Brother John hears the whispering and glares over at them. Brother Andrew finishes his breakfast and waits until the abbot, the monk who runs the whole monastery, prays. He goes back to his workshop to finish his table. It is a beautiful piece of furniture. He knows he should not be proud of it, but he carves Andrew, his work, on the underside of the table, in tiny, tiny letters. Maybe one day, someone will see the letters and know that Brother Andrew made this table with his own hands. A few lessons ago, we learned that the years after the fall of Rome are called the Middle Ages, and that in England these years are also known as Dark Ages. Do you remember why we call this time the Dark Ages? Most people in England could not read or write, so they did not write down stories and histories. When Augustine and his companions came to England, they told the Anglo-Saxons about Christianity, but they also taught them how to read and write. They wanted these new Christians to be able to read the Bible. Monks in monasteries also thought that reading and writing were important. After all, they spent a large part of every day reading the Bible and books written by religious men. But back in the Dark Ages, books were not as easy to make as they are today. Bookmaking was a long, complicated process, and only the monks were skilled enough to make beautiful books. In the Dark Ages, you could not just go to a store and buy paper. The monks began by making a special paper called parchment out of animal skin. They put cow or sheep skins in running water, such as a stream or river, for several days. Then they soaked it again in a barrel filled with water and lime, a chemical that loosened the hair on the skin, for several days more. Finally, they would stretch out the skin, scrape the hair off with a knife, and then attach it to a frame so that it could dry. But that was not all. Once the skin was dried, the monks would take it off the frame, wet it again, and rub it with a rough stone. One medieval book tells us that the best way to wet the skin was to take a mouthful of beer and then spit the beer all over the skin. When the skin had been dried all over again, it was time to make the ink by mixing soot with water and the sap of trees. The monk had to prepare quill pens by pulling feathers out of a goose or swan's wing, soaking the feathers in water, and scraping the tips. Then the parchment had to be cut into rectangles, folded over to make pages, and stitched together to make booklets. Finally, it was time to write out the words. All books were written out by hand. The monks worked all day in special rooms called scriptoriums. They made copies of the Bible and other important books by copying them out, one letter at a time. Each letter was carefully written in the monk's best handwriting. The books copied by the monks were not just black letters on white pages. The monks decorated the pages of their books with beautiful colors. They made paints by mixing their colors with egg whites, often real gold and silver, beaten into sheets so thin that they could float on the air, were attached to the page as part of the picture. Sometimes a picture took up an entire page. Sometimes it was painted just in the margin or at the top of a page. And sometimes just the first letter on a page was painted and leafed with gold. Writing out long books by hand was hard, slow work. An expert monk might copy out 2 or 3 books in a year, working 8 hours every day. So there were not very many books in the Middle Ages, and books were valuable. After all, they took months of labor. Often, books were chained onto library shelves so that people could only read them standing up, and you certainly could not check them out. Monks were not supposed to talk in the scriptorium. They were supposed to pay close attention to what they were doing. But monks got bored that we can still read some of the books written by hand in the Middle Ages, and we can see that sometimes monks wrote messages to each other, and even drew silly pictures in the margins of their books to "I am cold." One monk wrote that, "I wish we had a bigger fire, but Brother John won't let us." Another monk wrote, "I wish I were finished and I have to go to the bathroom." And a third monk drew a little mouse on the edge of his book and wrote, "Curse that mouse." Maybe the mouse had stolen some of his dinner. Several chapters ago, we read that the Roman Empire got too big for one emperor to rule all alone. The Roman Empire was divided into two parts. The part of the Roman Empire that still had Rome in it was called the Western Roman Empire, and the rest of the empire became known as the Eastern Roman Empire. Its capital city was called Constantinople. When the barbarians flooded into the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire fell apart, and the Eastern Roman Empire lost land to the barbarians too. It shrank until the Eastern Roman Emperor only ruled the land right around Constantinople, but the Eastern Roman Empire survived. Today, we call this last surviving part of the Roman Empire the Byzantine Empire. We call its people Byzantines, and their emperor the Byzantine Emperor. The Byzantine Empire was small at first, because the invaders had taken so much of its land away. But then, strong, warlike emperors began to reconquer some of the land that had once belonged to Rome. Eventually, the Byzantine Empire spread all around the Mediterranean Sea. Constantinople, the capital city of the Byzantine Empire, became the biggest city in the world. It was larger and richer than Rome had ever been. Imagine that you were walking through the streets of Constantinople. The road beneath your feet is smoothly paved. The Byzantines know the Roman art of making good roads out of rock and cement. People push and jostle you from every side. There are almost 1 million people in this one city. Many of the people are dressed like Romans, in togas, white robes draped over one shoulder and belted around the middle. You pass beautiful shops selling silks, jewelry, and all kinds of food: peaches, almonds, peanuts, grapes, fish, bowls of hot lentil soup, and cups of white kidney beans, cooked with sage and onion. The smells of fruit, meat, and soup mixed together and flowed out into the street. Suddenly, you were feeling very hungry. You don't see many children on the streets. "Where are all the children?" you ask a woman passing by. She is wearing a beautiful blue wool cloak, edged with gold thread. "They were in school, of course." The woman answers, "We have schools for all children, even the poor ones. The little ones are working on their reading and writing, and the older students are reading the great books written by the Greeks and Romans. Our children have better things to do than run around in the streets." "Excuse me, I have got to go. I am a lady in waiting to the Empress, and I have got to get to her palace right away." "Where is the palace?" you ask. The woman laughs. "What do you mean? The palace? We have 14 palaces in Constantinople. The emperor and his court have 5. The ladies of the court have 6 more of their own. And we even have 3 palaces for people who work for the emperor. But you cannot go inside them because you are just a commoner. If you want to see a beautiful building, go visit our biggest church, the Hagia Sophia. It's right up there." She points to a huge marble dome up ahead of her and hurries away. You walk towards the dome. The top of the Hagia Sophia shines bright white in the sun, and the walls glow red. The dome in the middle is surrounded by smaller domes all around it. You make your way through the main door. Sunlight is everywhere. The church has high windows all around the top of the walls, and the whole ceiling is covered with pure gold that glitters in the sun. The stones of the walls are all different colors: purple, green, crimson, and white. Columns rise up all around you. Even Rome never had a building as beautiful as this. Powerful rulers made Constantinople great, and one of the most powerful rulers of all Byzantium was Justinian, the Just Emperor. Justinian's parents were not important people. They were just peasants who lived hundreds of miles away from the great city of Constantinople. They grew crops and tended animals for a living. But Justinian did not want to be a farmer. He wanted to be a great, educated man. That he learned how to read, and he spent every spare minute studying law, music, poetry, and religious books. He begged his family to send him to Constantinople so that he could go to school. Finally, Justinian's parents agreed. They packed his clothes and books. His mother cooked him bread and meat to eat on the journey, and Justinian began the long journey to the city of Constantinople. When he arrived in the city, he was overwhelmed. The buildings were the biggest he had ever seen. People swarmed everywhere, and his studies were difficult. He had to memorize 50 lines of Greek poetry every day. He had to learn how to make convincing speeches in public. The Teachers at the school gave him hours of homework every day in math, music, and astronomy, the study of the stars. When he finished school, young Justinian joined the army. He was brave and full of energy, and he spent hours helping the officers keep records, order supplies, and plan their campaigns. Soon, more and more people agreed Justinian would make a good emperor. When the emperor died, Justinian was named ruler of the Byzantine Empire. When Justinian became emperor, in the year 527, Byzantium was not very big yet. But Justinian decided to change that. He had read many books about the greatness and glory of the old Roman Empire, and he wanted that empire back. So Justinian recruited more and more men into his army. He set off on campaigns to reconquer the countries that used to belong to Rome: Italy, North Africa, Spain, and the countries all around the shores of the Mediterranean. He even took Rome away from the barbarians who were living there. But the war to recapture Rome destroyed what was left of the old city. Justinian was left with nothing but ruins. Did Justinian recapture all the land that used to belong to Rome? No. But he made the Byzantine Empire bigger than it had ever been before. And now that he ruled all of these different countries, Justinian had a problem. Each country had its own laws. Something that was against the law in one country might be perfectly fine in another country. A thief might be put to death in one part of the empire, but only told to pay a fine in another part. It was very confusing to rule an empire full of different laws. So Justinian set out to make one set of laws for everyone in his empire. It was a huge job. Hundreds of scholars helped him to collect all the laws of the ancient Romans and Greeks, so that a new law could be written. Finally, the new set of laws, the Code of Justinian, was finished. Everyone in the Byzantine Empire was supposed to follow these laws. Here are some of the laws from the Code of Justinian. The sea and the seashore belong to everyone. Every person in my empire is allowed to go to the beach. No one can tell them, I own this part of the beach. Get off it. Rivers belong to everyone. Everyone in my empire can fish in the rivers without being told to stop. If you find a jewel or other treasure washed up on the seashore, you can keep it for yourself. You are allowed to own slaves and make them work for you without pay. But you cannot beat or mistreat your slaves unless they are disobedient. A thief who steals something valuable must pay the owner 4 times what the stolen object is worth. If you are trimming a tree near a road, be sure to call out to anyone coming by. Be careful. Limbs might fall on you. If you do not call out a warning and a limb falls on a traveler and hurts him, it's your fault. But if you call out a warning and the traveler walks under your tree anyway, it isn't your fault if a limb falls on him and hurts him. He should have paid attention to your warning. When a bishop, priest, or pastor is praying or preaching, he has to speak loudly enough for everyone to hear. If he does not, God will punish him, and so will the emperor. Do you think these are fair laws? Would you change them?